Yeah. Thank you. I want this to be more than just a lecture. I don't want to just stand up here and lecture for 50 minutes. It's going to be boring for me. It's going to be boring for you guys. So hopefully it is a little bit of interaction. How many of you guys were you in 7th grade? Do any of y'all remember when I was here teaching?
No.
5 years ago?
That was 18 years.
No, when I was teaching.
You were just born.
I was teaching 5 years ago here.
When you were teaching. Oh, yeah. We're here.
Y'all were here? What grade? Y'all were in 7th grade then? 6th grade?
I was here when you were teaching.
Yeah, Coach Brown was here when I was in high school. Probably junior high.
Elementary.
Or elementary.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, so what's interesting is I'm now 36 years old. I'm exactly twice the age of most of you guys. So it's a full generation. So you guys leaving this year, imagine your whole lifetime, and you'll get to where I'm at. What does that have to do with where you're at? I mean, I was probably exactly like most of you guys. In a lot of ways, I still am a lot like you guys. I went to ACA kindergarten through 12th grade. Most of you probably have been going here since elementary school, right? Yeah. So let's start with how is this, genuine question, how is this year going for you guys? Huh? Horrible? Hate wearing masks. For how many of you did your senior year turn out like you would expect it to?
No.
Is coronavirus a good or a bad thing?
It's so bad.
What's some of the goods?
What's good?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's brought us together, like, obviously.
Does anybody else think that there's been some good that's come out of it? No?
By together, I mean, I feel like it's brought the different medical departments together to be able to work together.
The different what departments?
Different medical departments.
Okay.
So we're, as a community, together, helping each other, trying to get better, washing our hands, we're helping each other, not just physically.
So as a general rule, I agree with you. So I think that there is more good than bad coming out of coronavirus. And we'll get into it in a second here. But what I'm going to argue, it's a good question. What I'm going to argue is that your experience in life, your happiness in life is dependent on the story that you're living in. What do I mean by that? Well, how many of the seniors last year who are now freshmen in college are living the story that they dreamed of? Right? What's the story that they expected? I'm gonna go to Alabama. I'm gonna go to Auburn, and I'm gonna join a sorority. I'm gonna join a fraternity, or I'm just gonna get away from my parents and I'm gonna party. I'm gonna have a great time. I'm gonna have a ball. And now, with coronavirus, it's thrown a wrench in that, right? It's like, well, we got a social distance. But what's the cause of their unhappiness? It's largely this expectation of what college life should be like. And it's probably the same for you guys now. For senior year, your expectation of what senior life was going to be like, this is way different. So as a result, it's all bad. Right? All right, let's zoom out just a little bit. What do you think most of your parents, most of people my age even, let's zoom out on a little bit bigger of a story, right? Because this story that I was just talking about is the story that It's in the air that we breathe in the U.S., right? And what is that story? When I taught senior Bible 5 years ago, one of the first things that we did as a class was we'd write our own eulogies. Y'all know what a eulogy is? Yeah. What is it? What somebody reads about your life when you're dead, right? And the story, it was interesting, right? It followed the same pattern for 70 plus seniors. And tell me if this doesn't represent the story that most of you guys have for the future of your lives. I'm gonna play football in high school or play a sport. Hopefully I'll get a D1 scholarship. Go to college, I'll be a star athlete, or I'll just be a cool fraternity or sorority person, and college is gonna be a lot of fun. At college, near the end of college, I'm going to find the love of my life, right? My dream guy or dream girl, and we're going to get married. And I'm going to start out making a lot of money. I'll do well in college. I'm still going to have fun, but I'm going to do well in college. So then, I get my first job. I'm doing well, and I'll start climbing the ladder, right? And then I get not only good pay, but I get good vacation days so I can travel the world. I mean, that's what is instilled in us here at ACA, right? We love to travel. We love seeing the world and experiencing new cool things. After that, we might do some mission trips here and there, but it's largely that. After that, we're going to have 2.5 kids. 2.4 kids, right? I think that's the average. 2 to 3 kids. And a lot of the seniors in my class, they already had thought of the names. You guys, has anybody in here thought of names of their kids that they're going to have one day?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Give me, what's the name?
Big Dawson.
Big Dawsy?
Big Dawson.
Big Doss Head. Big Dawson. Oh. What are you going to name him? Over here. Savannah Jean. Double name?
Oh, how cute.
Cornelius. Well, if we're not brave enough to say like these two, we've at least been thinking of it, right? You started to picture. You got one? What? What? Chloe. It's a great name. We've all thought of it, right? We've thought of who our spouse is going to be, what our life is going to be like. This is part of the story that we inherit, right? And then what happens around the age of 50 or 60? What happens? You put in your time from, you're going to graduate college, for some of you probably 5 years in college, maybe 6. When you graduate at 23, 24, the next 20 years of your life is raising kids, who knows if you're still in Tuscaloosa, maybe they're coming here. But that's from like 25 to 50. And then what do you hope to do? Retire. You retire and you kind of sail off into the sunset, right? That's the American dream. That's what we all hope for. And what happened in 2008, 2009 was there was a big economic depression, right? And so for people my age that were coming out of college around that time, none of the big companies were hiring. So a lot of these 23, 24, 25-year-olds had to move back in with their parents. They had to work dead-end jobs. They came out of college, and now they're in debt. $50,000, $100,000 in debt, depending on what college they went to, maybe a couple $100,000 in debt, and they can't get a job. And so what happened was, I know a lot of my friends, right? People that went to different schools than I did, who weren't in the military, who had to find a job and couldn't find one. They're depressed. They're just sitting at home. And it was this story that, I go get a job. You know what? Oh, and shoot, if I don't have a job, I can't really provide for a family. So, I'm not getting married anytime soon. So this story kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and people are miserable. Now let's zoom out the story a little bit. What's the broader American story? Where did it spring from? Who were the founding fathers of the U.S.?
Benjamin Franklin.
Who?
Benjamin Franklin. Christopher Columbus.
When did Benjamin Franklin live? George Washington. Huh? When did they live? Around what time?
1776.
Okay, 1776. But who are the people that discovered the U.S.? Huh? LeBron.
Oh, I said 1492.
1492, Columbus discovered America, right? It was actually in the West Indies. He comes over in 1492, close to 1500. For the next 100 years, right, there's different settlements. What year, anybody know, when was Plymouth settled? 1620, there we go. Got some scholars in here. So, around 1620, right, we have these English settled, but who were these people that left Europe? Why did they leave Europe? For religious freedom.
Economic freedom.
Maybe, right? There was definitely part of it where they wanted to, it's a new world, right? All this opportunity is there. A lot of it, though, is, you know what? We want to be able to worship God how we want to worship God. And so you have in these little colonies, a number of them were Puritan settlers, right? It's, I think that's the Plymouth settlement. And in this, they're developed this notion that we in the U.S. we have a clean slate. We're a city on a hill. We're going to be a light to the rest of the world about how to live, right? We've learned from all these archaic monarchies in Europe. We're going to develop a democracy. We're learned. There's religious freedom. We're not going to be persecuting people for what they believe. But it was largely Christian, right? Persecution still did happen, right? For people who weren't Puritans. People who weren't Anglican. There were different colonies that were different denominations, and those denominations didn't really have religious freedom. So it's religious freedom for what I believe, but not what others believe. But that's a tangent. The broader story, right, is that we are this Christian nation, that we are this city on a hill, and eventually out of this is where we get to the dumbed down version is, God, freedom, America. Right? So there's this story. But now, what's happening? It's under attack. Right? Those Democrats, they're coming for our freedom. They're coming for God in America. And you know what? It's whenever something bad comes, you got to defeat the bad, right? Or we got to have something to blame, right? What screwed up your senior year? What screwed up the freshman year of the seniors last year? Coronavirus is bad. And so this is our story. Well, if this is the story that we're living in as Americans, right, obviously there's going to be polarization. And people are going to be in fear about what happens in the outcome of this election. Okay, so that's the broader story that most of us in the U.S. have grown up in. Now we're going to zoom out even more. So here I'm really going to test your historical knowledge, and we're going to do a full history of the world, right? And how much more time do we got? 30 minutes? I'm going to leave some time for questions if you have any. Are y'all's Bible teachers in here? Who are y'all's Bible teachers? They're in other classes. All right, so let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Science tells us that happened when? When did God bang out the Big Bang?
4 billion to 8 million years ago.
13.8 billion years ago. Right? It's a long time ago. 13.8 billion years ago. Right? Matter. God spoke and matter flung out into the universe. That lasts for about a chapter in the Bible. Right? Then we get to what date, or that's a verse, that's 2 verses really. Genesis 1 and 2. 1 and 2. Then we get to God created the sun. God created the earth. When does science tell us that happened? 4.6 billion years ago. And 4.56 billion years ago. Those are a couple verses in Genesis 1. Well, then what happens? A lot passes, right? Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. God says, let's make man, male and female, He created them. Genesis 3, what happens? Fall of Adam and Eve. And when did that happen? There's an astronomer who I really highly respect named Hugh Ross. And Hugh Ross says he agrees with this scientific reasoning that the universe is as old as most scientists say it is, right? Because he's an astronomer. We can see through the use of telescopes back into history, right? Because light travels. It takes time for light to get to us. We can deduce the age of the universe that way. That's how they've deduced it. Hugh Ross, following along this timeline, says, you know what? Adam and Eve probably lived around 30 to 40,000 years ago. So Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which was probably where? Mesopotamia, around that area. He puts it right in the Red Sea, between Saudi Arabia and the east coast of Africa. So here we are at Genesis 3, right? But most of the history of the universe has already passed, all the way up to 30,000. If you take 30,000 years, if you make time into like a nickel, and we were to stack nickels all the way up, 13.8 billion years. I could be way off on this, but I think it goes to the sun and back, something like that. The last 20,000 years is like one of those nickels. So this is where we're at in this grand story. Zooming in, and here's the point of me elaborating on this story. What it means to be a Christian is to live in this story. Right? Because if we're living in this American story, we're going to be disappointed. We're going to be upset with the way that things turn out. But if we're living in a different story, coronavirus, if Joe Biden were to win the election, These things, they don't faze us. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who wins the election. God is in control, and he's accomplishing his goal. And what I want to do is bridge the gap for a lot of you today, right? I grew up the exact same way, like having Bible class every day, right? And it was boring. It was really boring. Somebody would read a passage of a chapter, and it was usually football coaches or people who didn't really care as much about the topic. But here's the thing. It is real. This is a real story. Like, for instance, if I were to give you the name King David or Saul, I'm going to give you a few names. I want you to put them into a specific bucket, right? King David, Solomon, King Arthur, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Jesus, Napoleon, George Washington. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but usually there's one of two buckets that we put these names in. There's like a mythical bucket, which is these are good stories that we heard when we were kids. They're kind of mythical in nature. King Arthur, right? Beowulf, if you guys have had literature here. They're good stories to hear, and maybe some good implications for our lives, but they're not real, like Alexander the Great was, like Napoleon was. But let's zoom in. Now, so we've been zoomed out from Genesis 1 to Genesis 3 to Genesis 6. What happens in Genesis 6? The flood. God floods the entire world. Who's left?
Noah and the ark.
Noah
And the animals, 2 animals.
and his sons. They repopulate the earth. By Genesis 11, what happens? Tower of Babel. Good.
Tower of Babel.
What happens in Tower of Babel?
They build a tower.
They try to get to God. They try to be as good as God or better than Him.
They try to develop.
By building a Tower of Babel. Here's the thing. Do you think that we have this maybe arrogant way to look back at people back then. That's like, what idiots. They were trying to build a tower to like the sun. But really, the Tower of Babel, I think they were way smarter probably than we are today. They understood that there were multi-dimensions of reality, which physics is telling us today. Right? There's 14 dimensions of reality today? They understood that. And they understood, there are certain energy centers in the world. My theory is that the Great Pyramid of Giza could be the Tower of Babel. Right? It took humanity up until 1900 to build a building taller than the Great Pyramid of Giza. It wasn't built by the pharaohs of Egypt. Because what happens now? Like after God disperses mankind, what do you see popping up all around the world? Pyramids. There's pyramids in Mexico. There's pyramids in Egypt. There's pyramids in Asia, all over the world. Humans have been trying to return to heaven, or to pierce into heaven, to become like God. That's Genesis 11. God has a different plan. What happened in Genesis 12?
He
We spread them out in Genesis 11. Who do we meet in Genesis 12? Abraham. Good. So Abraham, when did Abraham live? When? What year? BC. There you go. It's a start. 400?
No, like 2000.
Bingo. What's your name?
Preston.
Somebody get him a cookie. 2000 BC. Good job, Preston. 2000, that's not that long ago. Right? 2000, I wasn't serious about getting him a cookie. That's not that long ago, right? If we're talking 13.8 billion years to get to where we are, 2000 BC, that's 4,000 years removed from us. Abraham, right? The rest of Genesis is about Abraham's offspring. Who are Abraham's kids? Who did Abraham have? Isaac? Who did Abraham marry? Or Isaac marry? Rebecca. Man, you guys are good. Who did they have as kids? Jacob and Esau. Jacob had 12 kids. Yep. Joseph was one. Joseph goes where?
To Egypt.
Around what time was that?
Let's go with 1500. 22, 23.
Oh, we're going the other way.
Work it down.
BC. So it's about, Abraham only lived 120 years, something like that. So if he was at around 2000 BC, right, to get to Jacob, he was probably alive when Joseph, or when all the kids were there, right? So Joseph goes to Egypt. Eventually, the whole family ends up in Egypt. Let's say it was around 1900 BC. What happens in Egypt? Huh? Famine. What? Joseph tells the Pharaoh, hey, let's store up all this grain. Pharaoh makes him high in power. They give him this land in northern Egypt. And then what happens?
His family comes too.
His family comes, right? So all the Israelites are there.
He sleeps with crap. His crap. He gets accused of sleeping with somebody's wife, doesn't he?
It's Tamar.
No, it wasn't Tamar. So that's before his family comes down. He gets put in prison. That's before he gets raised up to the number 2 man in Egypt.
That's that false rape allegation.
Yep. Well, so what happens? Egypt is like these Hebrews are having kids like rabbits. The population is exploding.
They get scared.
They get scared. And what do they do to them?
Put them in slavery.
They put them in slavery. They put the Hebrews in slavery. For how long? How long were they in slavery for? Huh? 400 years. So now where are we at? About 1500. They're in slavery for 400 years. Who shows up? Moses. Moses shows up. He goes out to live in Sinai, right? He killed one of the Egyptians and has to run away. He goes out and lives in Sinai for 40 years. By the time he's 80 years old, God comes to him and says, I want you to go and free my people. So he goes back to Egypt. And God works crazy miracles to free the people of Israel from Egypt. The 10 great plagues, right? God brings, this is around 1500, God brings the Israelites into the desert. A month into their journey, they stop at Mount Sinai. Right? At Mount Sinai, most of the book of Leviticus is written, right? The laws. Then we've got Numbers and Deuteronomy. The Israelites leave Mount Sinai and they're making their way to the Promised Land. Well, so what happens? They don't believe. They send the 12 spies into the land to survey it. They don't believe the report. The 10 of them come back saying there's no way we're going to be able to conquer these guys. They're huge. They're giants. So then God says, all right, we'll just wander around the desert for 40 years. Eventually, they make it in. Let's say we're still around 1450, 1500. They get into the land. Moses dies. Joshua leads them in. They split up the land among the 12 tribes. Then what happens? What's the next book? Judges. What happens in Judges? A lot. If you guys read the book of Judges, it reads like a horror story. I mean, there's a story near the end where a traveler is passing through, and his wife, the men of the city come out and they want to have sex with his wife. He gives his wife to these men to rape and pillage throughout the night. He's distraught by this, so he cuts up her body into pieces and sends it to the rest of the 12 tribes to say, look what happened in Israel. And the book of Judges kind of ends there. It's like people just did whatever they wanted to do. So this is about 400 years, right? They're in the land, but they're falling away. God raises up a judge to deliver them from their enemies. They fall away again. Eventually they say, what? Around the time of Samuel the prophet, what do they say?
We want a king.
We want a king. We need a king like the other nations have. It's the reason we keep falling away is because we don't have a king. So who's the first king? Saul. Saul, was he a good king or a bad king? Bad. Who replaces him? Eventually David. When does David live? When was David around? What year? In between y'all's. About 1,000. So about 1,000 BC. So 1,000 BC, David then has a son with Bathsheba. What was his name? Solomon. Was Solomon a good king or a bad king?
Yes.
Started out good. But what happened? What's interesting, if you read Deuteronomy 17, God predicts we think, the Israelites just decided that they wanted a king. In reality, it's in Deuteronomy 17. It says, when you guys choose to have a king, make sure that he reads this law and that he doesn't do three things. What are those three things? I don't want you to accumulate lots of wealth. I don't want you to accumulate wives for yourself. I don't want you to go and partner with Egypt and get chariots and horses from Egypt. These are like, there were a handful of things that the king was not supposed to do. Did Solomon do those things? Every one of them. He had, how many wives did Solomon have? Like 1,000 wives and concubines. Did he accumulate wealth? There's never been, right? There's few kingdoms that have accumulated more wealth than Solomon did. And he had stalls of horses from guess where? From Egypt. So God is not happy with this. And what does he do? He tells Solomon, look, I'm going to rip the kingdom from your hands. But because of my love for David, I'm going to do it after you die. So it was Solomon's son, Rehoboam, who under his leadership, the northern 10 tribes of Israel rebelled. Under this guy named Jeroboam. Right? So the northern kingdom had 19 kings, and all of them were bad. They all turned out evil. The southern kingdom, right, Benjamin and Judah, had about 22. And most were bad, but some of them were good.
About 10 minutes.
When did that happen? So around 720 BC, the Assyrians conquer northern Israel. Around that time, around 720, there was a good king in Judah at the time. So God prolongs the history of Judah. So in 720, it's really only Judah left. They last for another 150 years. And then what happens? Babylon comes and destroys the kingdom of Judah. What year?
About 555.
Close. 587. Babylon comes in, conquers Judah, takes them all into Babylon. Right? Now we're in the time of the prophets. Right? The Jews are in Babylon. Well, this is where I want you guys to see the intersection. Right? For most of us, because our Bible omits the book of Maccabees that's in most Catholic Bibles, what we call the Apocrypha, we don't really know what happens. There's like a 400-year just blank spot. We don't really know what's going on. But is God at work? Of course he's at work. So 587, Babylonians conquer Judah, take the Jews into captivity. There's a prophet named Jeremiah who prophesied this. And he says, you know what? Because of the sin of Judah, God's going to take you into captivity. And for 70 years, you're going to be in exile. But then God will allow a remnant to return and rebuild the temple. Well, 40 years later, there's a guy named Cyrus the Great. Ever heard of him? Who conquers Babylon. He was a Medo-Persian ruler. And Cyrus the Great is mentioned in the Bible. Cyrus the Great allows some Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Who are those guys? Ezra and Nehemiah. Right? So that happens. The second temple, Solomon's temple, was destroyed by the Babylonians, 587. The second temple was rebuilt, completed around 517. But here's the thing. Most, or a lot, of the Jews are still in captivity. And they're thinking, this can't be what the prophet Jeremiah was talking about. It doesn't look like King David's kingdom. So then the prophet Daniel starts questioning. He's like, you know what? Maybe it's not 70 years. Maybe it's 70 times 7. And there's this prophecy. You know what? Okay, maybe what we thought of as year wasn't really a year. Maybe it was this multiplication table. So 490 years. So around what happens in 330, right? How many of you guys have seen 300? Right? The Spartans. Who eventually conquers the Persian Empire? No. The Greeks. Alexander the Great in 332 conquers Persia. Well, Alexander conquers more of the world in a shorter period of time than anybody before had done. So in 332, and then over the next 10 years, he expands this kingdom all the way to the border of India. But then he dies. And his kingdom is split up among 4 of his generals. One of those generals was a guy named Seleucus the First. And he had the Seleucid Empire. And he gradually expanded his empire to include Judea. And one of his descendants was this guy named Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth. This guy and the Seleucid rulers were brutal overlords. So around this time, here's what I want you to see. The Jews, their desire for a Messiah was at a fever pitch. They're living in this story, and their story is that God is going to return and reestablish the kingdom like under David. And so this is the story that they're living in. They're looking for a Messiah. They're looking for a Savior. And who do they pick? There's this guy named Judas Maccabeus, right? He could be the one to deliver us from the Seleucids. So they staged a coup around 170 BC. They put all their weight behind him, and they won. They achieved somewhat of independence from the Seleucids, but really most of the Jews knew who was really in control. Right? The Seleucids gave them somewhat autonomy. They said, okay, we'll let you be a king, but really we control you. And so eventually, and they kind of turned wicked. They were fighting among each other, so Jews are like, this can't be the ruler. Well, around 64 BC, who's rising to power? Rome. So Rome comes in, 64 BC. There's a Roman general named Pompey. Pompey's wrecking house in the Middle East, just conquering. Pompey sees this fight going on between Maccabean descendants for the throne and says, you know what, I'm going to take Judea for Rome. So he conquers Judea. Brings that into the Roman Empire. Well, Rome's really not much different from the Seleucids, right? They're just overlords. And Rome, the Jews were fine for the most part if you left them alone and let them worship how they wanted. But the deal with Rome is they liked letting people know who was in charge. Right, have y'all seen, who's seen Gladiator? Y'all haven't seen Gladiator? Man, it's a good movie. You should watch it. In this movie, there's a scene, right, where the Romans are conquering. Anyway, watch the movie. The point is that the Jews did not like it, right? They thought, okay, if we can't win our kingdom through rebellion, through Judas Maccabeus, we're going to win it through political. So who comes along in around 37 BC? There's this warlord, essentially, named Herod, who becomes friends with different Roman generals. I believe it was Mark Antony. Herod becomes friends with Mark Antony in Egypt, right? Cleopatra. These are real people happening in that time. Well, Caesar, he goes to Rome, and Caesar says, you know what, you can be king of the Jews. Until Q&A. Or is it in? You know what did Herod the Great do? What were the Jews expecting for this great kingdom? They were expecting, this battle against the great enemy, against Rome, or it was against the Seleucids, or it was against somebody else. They were expecting a Messiah figure, a leader who would lead them out, like Moses did, out of Egypt, who would establish the temple. And that's what Herod the Great did. If you've gone to Jerusalem, any of you guys gone to Jerusalem? Didn't y'all take a trip? In Jerusalem, He built the most magnificent temple, maybe rivaling Solomon's temple, around 30 BC. Well, you know what? He was nasty. He was sly in the way that he dealt. People knew, okay, this guy can't be the Messiah. He's essentially in bed with the Romans. Well, this is the environment that Jesus is born into. And here's a big point, right? If you were living in that time, what kind of Messiah would you be looking for? We would probably be like most of the disciples. Most of the disciples, for 3 years, they spent time with Jesus, and they were like, when are you going to do it? When are you going to overthrow Rome? And this is likely what happened with Judas Iscariot. Right? He believed that Jesus was the Messiah, was the chosen one, was the leader that was going to overthrow Rome. And you know what? He said, I'm just going to force his hand. I'm going to betray him into the hands of, the high priest and the Sanhedrin and ultimately the Romans, so that he will have to show himself as the Messiah. Jesus came and died, right? But really, to most Jews, he was a false Messiah. Most Jews, he just came and went. It was a blip on the radar for most Jews at the time. And here's the parallels between them and us. I don't think most of us are in different seats. Most of us today are looking for a different Savior, for a different salvation, for a different heaven. Most of us in the U.S., right, our heaven is the American dream. We just want to get back to normal. Let's get rid of coronavirus. Let's keep the good people in office so that we can live as we've been living and live as we want to live in the future. But this is a real history. And we can trace it back, and Jesus was a real person who lived. This isn't this fairy tale. So there's a whole other 2,000 years to get to where we're at. But hopefully, I just started, right, you on this journey. I've been on this journey for the last 18 years of trying to figure out, what is this story? Because I followed this the American story, right, as my dad mentioned in the beginning. As soon as I left high school, I went to college at the academy, played football there. I knew I wasn't going to play in the NFL, so I got involved in other stuff. I went to Paris for 2 years. It's like kept getting better and better. Well, I met all these friends at this school in Paris who were the sons and daughters of diplomats, billionaire investors, business owners. And I thought, you know what, my life's going to end up, I'm just like them. I'm going to keep climbing this ladder. Well, when I left Paris, I went to my first job in the Air Force, and I was a hospital administrator. Right? On paper, I had 35 people that reported to me, and I didn't have any school debt, had a nice car, 4Runner, lived in a house close to the beach, had a lot of great vacation, and I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable. Because here's the story that I was living in. The story was, you know what? If I can be anybody that I want to be, and I'm just this assistant flight commander at an Air Force Base hospital in Langley, Virginia, the world is unjust. God is unjust to me. And it was over the years that followed, I began to realize, you know what, maybe my picture of Christianity has been twisted. Maybe the story that I'm living in isn't the true story. So I'll stop there, and I think we got 5 minutes left. If there's any questions, I don't know if you got any questions, but happy to answer. So
Where are you at now?
So now I'm 5 years ago I moved to Nashville to start what I believed was this calling on my life, was to share these kinds of stories. So I'll share. About 4 years ago, I heard about this ceremony in Jerusalem called the Miracle of Holy Fire. And I'll have my dad share it with you guys, but I went there. I had a friend who knew one of the priests in this church, and the church is called Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Well, sepulchre is Latin, and it hides the meaning for most of us. The sepulchre means tomb. So the claim is that this church is the church that's built over the tomb of Christ and Golgotha, where he was crucified. This was crazy to me. I didn't think that we could know where Christ's tomb was. But this church, it was built by Constantine the Great in 325 AD. And it hasn't moved since. National Geographic did a documentary special on it 3 years ago. And where they uncovered, for the first time in 500 years, this rock that they put to protect the limestone bed. They uncovered it and found and tested the mortar that they saw underneath there and dated it back to 335 AD. So this spot where Christians have been worshiping at the tomb of Christ for 1,700 years hasn't changed. Well, every year at Easter, there's a ceremony that happens called the Miracle of Holy Fire. And the claim is that Jesus shows up. He visibly manifests himself in the church through these flashes of light. And he's done this every year for at least the last 1,200 years. We have written accounts going all the way back to 800 AD. Well, so I went to this ceremony, and I was able to bring a videographer, and we filmed the ceremony. I interviewed the Greek Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Catholic Archbishop of Jerusalem, an Armenian Archbishop, and this story has captured me. And this, right, if I can share anything with you guys, getting involved in this story is how you find what you really want to do with your life. The reason that you go to Bible class, that you learn history at all, is to know this story. It's really, really hard. Just look around. Look around at people my age, at people your parents' age. People aren't happy, right? It's hard. It's hard to live with a life of peace and joy. And there's only one way to do it. It's getting involved in this story. So, and it takes work. I'm going to tell you that. Just like how much work it takes to get good at football, to get good at whatever position you're at, or school, if that's your thing. It takes work, but the work can be joyful, right? It can be really interesting. Like, this is the most fascinating stuff to read about this church, about this ceremony, etc. So.
Spend your days doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Hopefully this was somewhat interesting for you. Hopefully it wasn't just a lecture. It was there for a bit, so I apologize for that. But if you have any questions, or if you want to hear more, I'm happy to point you guys in the direction, or point you to certain resources or whatever else.
What should they be doing to find their story? Repeat the question.
so the question was, what should you be doing to find this story? And take it seriously, right? Don't take things at face value, in the sense of, here's the best. What's up, Chris? The breakthrough moment happened for me when I learned that the definitions that we have in a dictionary or in a book, or the definitions that are given to me by a teacher, they're not set in stone. That humans have been trying to answer these questions since the beginning of human history. And that what we assume is the gospel can be picked up and looked at from different angles. Right? I think most of us in here think we know the answer to what is sin, to what is salvation, to what is heaven, to what is hell. But I'm going to tell you, those words are incredibly complex and incredibly deep. And trying to figure out what the definition is, can consume the rest of your life. So,
I want to make one more comment. What impressed me last night, and they just left the picture for you to put together, is what he was talking about with Israel. Everybody's looking for a Messiah to save them from this or that. And he said, Dad, it's no different. The church is looking to Donald Trump to save our freedoms, to get rid of abortion, to do this. And I've said, and it all of a sudden dawned on me, that's what we're looking for. If we think like the Jewish people did, we can throw off all the nonsense of the liberals. And just like what's going on there, we're so divided. I've actually had somebody come in this school and tells me, I'm ready to go to war. Is that what God's called us to? To go shoot the people that disagree? And it's happening, guys. That's what's so scary. So be very, very careful what you expect. The other thing that Nate said that blew me away is he said, Dad, I'm going to tell him. He said, I'm not going to vote. What? My allegiance is to the Lord Jesus. And I could live in any environment with that allegiance. I could live in a liberal America or a conservative America. I could live in communist China with my allegiance to Christ. So my greatest aim is not to get out and campaign for Donald Trump. It's to build a life through prayer and other things that he's doing to be aligned with the Lord Jesus. But doesn't that make sense? Guys, we get so screwed up in where we're going. I know you're in high school and Nate was the same way and I was probably the same way. It's homecoming. Let's go tear up stuff, whatever. Don't miss the big picture. It's what I see and what Nate is seeing. He sat right there where you are. Coach Smelly, who gave you the hardest lick you ever took in your life, high school or college?
Nate weighed about 60 pounds more than he does right now, and his biceps used to be as big around as my head. And my high school coach thought it'd be funny when I was in 8th grade to line us up 10 yards apart and make us go full speed at each other. Nate literally knocked me out. I'm talking knocked me out. He'd have knocked you out too.
Don't let him fool you though. He was in 8th grade, but he was my age as a senior.
All right, guys, you've been great. What Nate told you is deep. I want you to think about where we are, what we're going, and what you're going to do with your life. Thank you.